Hey, how's it going everyone? Evil Monkey here, back with another build guide. This one's for Archangel Serena, who's just been insane at Onslaught 4 and most general content, thanks to her high damage, massive AoE, and her insanely low cooldowns that let her not only deal with every wave, even if it has high health enemies, but also do it back to back. And thanks to her third ability, also not only being a damage ability, but a movement ability, it also gives her an insane amount of mobility as well. Now, if you guys don't know what Archangel does, let me go and throw it up on screen. Go ahead and pause and read if you need to. But Serena has been a lot of fun with this build. They really did nail it with a skill power build for her. And like I said, not only is it insanely fun, but it's also insanely good at endgame content, allowing finally for Serena to have some more viable options other than just a gun build. But that's enough of me yapping. Let me go ahead and get you guys into the build guide so you can get out there with Serena. And as always, we'll go ahead and start off with our mod section, where I'll go ahead and take every module in the build, break them down, and go over how they fit into the overall build. And to start off, our mods will be our crit modules, since Serena is going to be a crit descendant in this build, with the first one being skill concentration. Now the reason we're running this one is just your basic skill critical hit damage increase module. It gives a lot of damage increase with no downside, so it's one we'll just run for free. Then we have skill insight. This one is your basic skill critical hit rate module, which we're going to run to try and hit 100% skill critical hit rate, which we can do in this build. So this one's definitely needed. And then we have front lines and emergency measures, which we're going to run these for the same reason. They give us a nice chunk of both skill critical hit damage and skill critical hit rate. So why is Serena a crit character in this build? Well, her first, third, and fourth abilities, which are all three of her damage abilities, have a unique modifier on them that says they get plus 20% skill critical hit rate. And this is added with Serena's base, 10%, bringing her to 30% base skill critical hit rate. Which, with everything we're running here, including some stuff we're going to run the Arche Tree, we're actually going to be able to hit 100% skill critical hit rate, which is really good. Usually, in First Descendant, if you can hit 100% skill critical hit rate, you usually want to, because it's a really good stat to get. Now, the one weird thing about this, though, is because the modifiers on each skill, stating each skill itself gets that increased skill critical hit rate, it won't be reflected in your character stat sheet, so you won't actually be able to see it there. It's just one of those things you kind of just have to do the math on each skill to realize that it's 100% skill critical hit rate. There's no spot that actually tells you that you're going to be at 100%. But this will, once again, greatly increase our damage, which we want, since this is also mainly a skill-based build. And of course, on top of using skill crit to increase our skill damage, we also do want skill power to also increase it. With the module we're running here is power increase. But there's an interesting thing I need to state here about power increase. So, some people may be wondering about power increase versus fire specialist, and which one's better. If you guys don't know what the two do, power increase increases your base skill power versus fire specialist increasing your fire skill power, which are both used in the damage formula for First Descendant. And often enough, as I usually state, you want to kind of balance out these two pools to honestly get the max damage. But power increase versus fire specialist, which one's better? So it turns out, for your Ancestor module, if you do not roll fire skill power boost ratio, fire specialist is better. But if you do roll any fire skill power boost ratio on your Ancestor module, power increase becomes better. But the difference is if you don't have fire skill power boost ratio, power increase is only slightly worse than fire specialist, to the point that if we were to say your third ability did, let's just say, 15 million damage of power increase, fire specialist will only do about 15.1 million. But if we add fire skill power boost ratio and we say fire specialist with the fire skill power boost ratio from our Ancestor module did 15 million, power increase with the fire skill power boost ratio from our Ancestor module will end up doing something like 19 million. So power increase becomes much better if you have any fire skill power boost ratio on your Ancestor module. But since power increase really isn't that much worse if you don't. It's just okay to generally run it. That's just like a little bit of min-maxing for anyone who's curious. But beyond that, another way we're going to go ahead and increase our overall DPS, besides skill power and skill crit, is going to be through cooldown, which we're actually able to hit max cooldown, which is 75% cooldown with this build. And our first cooldown module is going to be Nimble Fingers, which gives us a good amount of skill cooldown with no downside, so it's just a free one to run. Then we have Shield Consumption, which gives us a large amount of skill cooldown with the only downside of minus max shields, but we really don't care about that because we don't care about shields, since our main survivability stat will be our HP. Now, why do we want to run so much cooldown in this build? Well, the biggest thing is this will allow us to spam all of our DPS abilities a lot more, being your first, third, and fourth abilities. It lets you spam out your first ability to shred more enemies' resistances, and be able to spam out your first ability to hit enemies far away, or take care of those Vulgus dropships that spawn a lot in things like Onslaught. This is actually incredibly good at taking care of those. It also lets you spam out your fourth ability to deal with things like Tyrants better, or any heavy tanky enemies. And then it actually does a couple of cool things with your third ability. So not only does this pretty much let you spam out your third ability back to back to back to pretty much do continuous wave clear, it also has the upside of allowing you to use your third ability for mobility, because your third ability is actually really good at mobility. It's a pretty quick dash, and you can hold it to go longer and further. And since your grapple hook isn't going to be always up, your third ability turns out not to only be a great way to do high damage and wave clear, but also a great way to get across the battlefield. It also allows you to do things like dodge abilities more, or maybe dive down and get that HP orb on the ground if you need some more HP. It's just a great way to get additional mobility. And that's the other big factor why we want to run so much cooldown here. And then for our next module, we're going to run HP Amplification. Now running this one, because this gives us a large chunk of HP, with the only downside being minus max shield, which, as we talked about before, we really don't care about shields, since HP is our main survivability, and Serena scales much better with HP than shields. So HP Amplification is just a really good survivability module to run here. And then our next module is going to be Skill Expansion, which we're running for its skill effect range. Now this is just your basic skill effect range module, and it has no downside, and it's pretty much as good as the next best skill effect range module, with only being slightly worse. But that one has the downside of, minus skill modifier, so we're just going to take the basic one instead, since it has no downside. And we're running this for two reasons. The first is to make it so your third ability has a larger radius that hits to help with wave clear, and the other reason is this gives more projectiles for your first ability, thus allowing you to do more DPS with it. But I do want to make one quick note. If you want to change out any module for anything like more survivability or anything else you might want to run, Skill Expansion is the module I'd recommend changing out, because yes, while it does give us more projectiles for your first ability and more range for your third ability, those aren't exactly needed. They just help the build feel a lot better. So this is an okay one to swap out if you want to, since, especially with us running so much cooldown, we can just spam out those abilities either way to make up for the lack of range. But once again, I personally feel like skill effect range makes this build feel a lot better, so that's why this module is here, but you can swap this one out if you want to. And then for our Ancestor module, as always, we'll go ahead and move that to its own section, where we'll go ahead and break down every stat you can roll in your Ancestor module and put them into a tier chart. Now, if you guys want to go to that right now, there is a link in the description and a timestamp in the timeline of the video itself. And now that we've finished all of our main modules, let's go ahead and hop into our trigger modules, which there are two trigger modules you can run here. The first one being Arche Blaze. Now this one's a really cool one that can work anytime you're up in the air with your second ability active and use your first ability. Each of the projectiles of your first ability have a chance to proc Arche Blaze, which is an additional, I believe, 1300% scaling at max value, which is a lot of damage to add on to your first ability, considering that even just at base, you shoot 7 projectiles. So this can greatly ramp up your damage, but there's a couple downsides. The first one being it only works with your first ability, And the second one being one the stat you have to roll is trigger rate, and Arcade Blaze becomes a lot less efficient the lower trigger rate you roll. So there is a second trigger module you can use instead, and that's Power Beyond, which has the benefit of this one just gives you increased skill base power and works across all of your damage abilities, including your first, third, and fourth. So this will also ramp up your damage across all of your abilities, including your first, and has no downside. But Arcade Blaze will technically give you the higher DPS value. If you're going to spam out your first ability, which you usually should, since you're going to spam out your first ability a lot to just shred enemies' resistance. But if you plan on spamming out your third ability more than your first ability, technically Power Beyond can be a good substitute, since this will also increase the damage of your third ability a lot. But both of these are good, just for different reasons. I think on average, Arcade Blaze will be much better, but once again, you have to roll a high trigger rate for that to be efficient. And now let's go over our final mod section, our Ancestor Mod section, in which we'll go ahead and go over every set you can roll in your Ancestor module, break them down, and put them in a tier chart that you guys can use as a reference if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. And starting with S tier, which is our best tier, we have Singular Skill Power Boost Ratio. This is really good on Serena, because all of your damage abilities scale off Singular, and in First Descendant, there really usually isn't many areas you can get type skill power. Usually your Ancestor module is the best place to get it, so this will greatly ramp up your damage. Then we have Fire Skill Power Boost Ratio. Now unfortunately for Fire Descendants, there isn't many places outside of your mods that you can usually get Fire Skill Power Ratio. In fact, as we talked about in our mod section, you can run Fire Specialist, but if you do roll Fire Skill Power on your Ancestor module and put instead Power Increase in your mod section, you can greatly ramp up your damage to be a lot higher. Then we have Skill Critical Hit Rate Damage. Now, this one is really good because Serena is once again a skill crit character, so rolling a skill hit damage will really ramp up your damage a lot. Then we have an A tier, which is still a really good tier. Max HP. This is mainly for survivability because Serena scales really well with HP. And things in a lot of the endgame hit really hard, so it's just a really good set to roll. Then we have skill effect range. Now, this one is just really good because once again, it can increase the counter projectiles of your first ability and increase the range of your third ability. And we don't hit max in either naturally in this build. This can allow you to hit your max values. It can also potentially, if you roll a high enough value, allow you to go ahead and replace your range module with something like additional HP or maybe some extra damage. And then our middle of pack values in B tier, we have Singular Skill Modifier. Once again, all Serena's damage abilities scale with Singular, but because all those modifiers are really high, this won't really increase their damage by much, but it will increase it by a little bit. So it's not a bad stat to get. Then we have skill cost. Serena has really high skill costs, so this will help reduce them, but we go ahead and manage that with Wave of Light, which we'll talk about later in the build. So it's not really a great stat to roll, but it's not a bad one. And then of course we have defense here, which is just a good survivability option. It's never a bad value to roll. And then going on to C tier. Now, C tier, these are values you just kind of want to avoid because they don't really help the build too much. If you take them as a positive, but if you take them as a negative, they would hurt the build a lot. The first one here is skill critical hit rate. Now, we already hit 100% skill critical hit rate naturally in this build, so we don't really need any more. And technically, if you did roll some, you could replace some modules in the mod section, but it would be much more efficient just to roll increased damage, because that will just ramp up the damage even higher. So you don't really have too many damage options mod-wise outside of what we already have. So this doesn't really help the build to roll as a positive. If you took it as a negative, you would just not be at 100% skill critical hit rate anymore, which means you would just on average do less damage. Then our next one is skill cooldown. Similar logic to skill critical hit rate. We already hit max skill cooldown, so you don't really need any more modules there. You could once again replace it with a different module in your mod section and just take out the skill cooldown mods, but there's not really much you could replace it with. And you don't want to lower your skill cooldown, so you don't want to take it as a negative. So these two stats, I would say just avoid, because they don't really help the build too much, and you'd honestly just rather have something that increases your damage on your Ancestor module. And then going on to D tier. Now D tier, these are values that if you want a negative value on your Ancestor module, these are perfect to take. Because if you take them as a positive, they really don't help the build at all, or really doesn't do anything at all either way. And if you take them as a negative, they don't really hurt the build either. So these are just perfect values to take because as positives, they do nothing almost, and as negatives, they just really don't hurt the build at all either. Our first one is skill duration up. Now, you don't really need duration at all for Serena because the only thing that's really affect is your burn, but you already spam out your abilities enough, so you really don't care about it being lower duration. So we really don't care about this value at all. Then max shield. Once again, we're focusing on max HP, so we're fine with getting rid of shield, because we don't really care about it at all. And then dimension skill power boost ratio and dimension skill modifier. None of our damage abilities scale off dimension, so this would actually do nothing for the build at all. And then max MP. We already have enough MP, so we don't really care about lowering that too much, since we can just regen it once again with Wave of Light. And that's going to wrap up this tier chart. Hopefully this will help you guys while you're deciding if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. And now that we've wrapped up all of our module sections, let's go ahead and go over our Arche Tree. So the first things we want to grab here are those 2 HP nodes at the bottom. This is for more survivability. Then we also want to grab those 2 skill effect range nodes over on the right there, since this affects not only our first ability's projectile count, but also our third ability's AoE, so it's just very efficient to grab. And then we also want to grab the skill critical hit rate nodes and the skill critical damage to increase our damage and also help us get up to that 100% skill critical hit rate that we want to hit. Then we want to grab this gold skill cooldown node. This is once again to help us hit max skill cooldown, so we can spam out our abilities more. And then finally, we also do want to grab that mutant cell node up at the top right. And then going into our mutant cells, you actually have 2 different options you can run. So the first one is Fire Chain Catalyst. This is really cool because when you do damage to enemies, you reduce their fire resistance, which is really good. The only thing is this scales off your fire skill power. And so if we're not running much fire skill power in the build, this gets greatly reduced in efficiency, where you need a fairly sizable chunk of fire skill power boost to get the max efficiency. But with what we're running, it really won't decrease resistance by much. So unless you get it either A, on your Ancestor module, or B, decide to run Fire Specialist in your mod section, this just loses a lot of efficiency. But with one of those 2, it does become fairly efficient at reducing resistance. That way you'd have 3 ways to reduce resistance that we'll be running in this build. But if you don't have much fire skill power boost, the other option to run is Fire Cohesion, which gives you stacking skill power, well, fire skill power, every time you defeat an enemy. You have a 50% chance to get this, and this can also ramp up your damage a lot. So both these are good, but in different scenarios. Fire Chain Catalyst is good if you're going to be running a lot of fire skill power boost ratio, and in every other situation, Fire Cohesion is good. And moving on to our components that we'll be running for this build, we'll be running Firebrand Set, which has a really cool 4-set passive bonus of any time you apply burn to an enemy, they get their resistances lowered. And this works with Serena's first ability, which is already shredding resistances, but these stack. So now you'll be double shredding the resistance for more damage. And it turns out the higher you go, the more efficient Firebrand becomes. So in something like Onslaught 4, where enemies start to have crazily high resistance values, shredding the resistance with Firebrand set bonus and Serena's first ability greatly ramps up your damage. And because your first ability auto targets enemies, you can just pretty much guarantee that every enemy in your sight is going to get hit by that and have their resistances shredded. So this just becomes really efficient to run, once again, the higher you go. Though, technically for lower end content, like 400%, Slayer set is probably more efficient, but Firebrand will still work for those. But once again, we mainly want to run Firebrand, because for anything that's higher leveled, like Axion Dungeons, Onslaught, or any of the new endgame modes that are about to come out, shredding resistance will just be much higher value. Now, our substats we're going to run for this is going to be max HP, MP recovery in combat, max MP, defense, and MP recovery modifier. These will all help with survivability, and also helping with Serena's heavy MP costs. Now, for the cores you'll run for this component set, we're going to go ahead and run 4 max HP. This is because, once again, Serena scales really well with HP. And 4 defense for survivability. This will help you take a lot of reduced damage from those high damage enemies. Now let's go over Inversion Reinforcement. So for this one, we're going to focus on survivability, with our first node here being Selective Stimulation. Since Serena's in the air a lot, getting a heal every once in a while just from this will help a lot with survivability, especially to help keep you topped up on HP. Then next we have Deploy Hardened Shell. This one, every time you take damage, it starts stacking to where you get damage taken reduction at a percentage value, which helps a lot when enemies are hitting really hard, to reduce by a percentage of the damage you're taking from them. And in similar logic with Combat Adaptation, this also gives us percentile damage taken reduction. So we stack this with Deploy Hardened Shell to take a lot less damage. Once again, the idea here is that we want as much survivability as possible, because we already do plenty of damage. And now for the reactor of this build, we'll run a Fire Singular Reactor. And this is because all of Serena's damage abilities scale off Singular. And of course, Serena is a Fire Descendant. With our substats for this, we're also going to run Skill Cooldown, which will help us hit that max cooldown rate, and Skill Critical Hit Damage, which will just ramp up our damage a lot since Serena is a crit character. And time for the weapon we'll be running this build, which is important for this build because this is how we're going to solve Serena's MP cost issue. But since the build of the weapon isn't the main focus of this build guide, instead of going over every single module like we did for Serena, I'll just show the build on the screen and talk about why we're running Wave of Light over any other weapon. So the main reason why we're running Wave of Light and the way it fixes our MP issues is thanks to Serena's second ability. So while that's active and you're in the air, impact rounds, when they crit, give us MP back. And they work with any damage from an impact round weapon, including their unique abilities. And this is where it gets really cool. So for Wave of Light, its unique ability is you can shoot these little orbs on the ground, or these little circles, and if an enemy runs into it and takes damage from that and it's a crit, you get your MP healed. And because Wave of Light is a crit gun, it becomes really easy to be able to get our MP back. In fact, if you're in something like Onslaught 4, and there's a Tyrant, you can just shoot this at its feet, and because the Tyrant will take small tick damage from Wave of Light, you'll just be constantly topped off on your MP. This is how we fix this MP cost issue. And there's another cool synergy with this. So to be able to activate that unique ability on Wave of Light, you need to reload the weapon. Well, Serena's third ability, the one we're using a lot for mobbing and getting around the battlefield, it's our dash ability, also has the extra benefit of it reloads your current weapon. And when it does this, it counts as a reload for Wave of Light's unique ability, meaning you can just always have Wave of Light's unique ability ready at any time you want to refill your MP bar. And this is how we're going to fix Serena's MP issue. Now, some people may be wondering why not Truly Deadly Arson, since that gives stacking skill power when you use fire abilities. Well, that one actually doesn't work with Serena with this module, because you need a continuous type damage ability to proc that. And in fact, the type of skill power it also gives is continuous type skill power, so it wouldn't even work for Serena in the first place, even if you didn't need a continuous ability to proc it. So that one just flat out doesn't work with her. Instead, like I said, we're going to run Wave of Light because this is very convenient as it fixes our MP issue. And the other benefit that I didn't mention is because those orbs / circles stay on the ground for a while, you can use all of your other abilities while those circles are healing your MP orbs, meaning it really doesn't stop you from doing DPS with your main damage abilities, making Wave of Light just a really good weapon for this build. And it's finally time for our tips and tricks section, where I'll show you guys a few things to help you along while you're playing Serena. So the first thing I want to show you guys, we'll summon an enemy, has to do with your dashes. So you want to hold the button while you're using your third ability. Otherwise, your third ability will look something like this. Let me try them a second. This is a small little, dash. Gives you a little bit of damage. But if you want the full one, you want to hold it because it causes you to go much further, and you get much more bombs. And it does work in every direction. The small little dash is nice for mobility, but outside of that, it's just always better to hold it. The other thing is, as you guys can see, while we're charging that, or holding that whole ability, letting its charge go through, your third ability is already going off cooldown, so also let your cooldowns catch up. The other thing I want to show you guys, actually I want to show you a few things, but for this one, so there's actually a cool trick to get like some more damage from your third ability. So normally it does about that much damage. It does about, I'd say about 200 million to 250. But if you angle it, you can actually cause bombs to cascade on one part more continuously. There's a little bit more damage. It's actually a low one. Let me actually let the height get full. Yeah, you can see there it's getting to 300 million. This is just a way that if you have like one really tanky enemy, you can use this to just kind of get all the bombs on him at once, doing a lot more damage. This isn't great for like just general mobbing, but if you have like a really high health elite, this helps a lot. The other thing I wanted to show you guys was your third ability. It does give you a stack of your first. You can see there, just instantly recharges. So that's just kind of a convenient thing. And then the next thing I wanted to show you guys was Wave of Light, how it works. So you guys can see we're at pretty much just no mana. You can see there, we just instantly got pretty much all of our MP back. This works better on something like a Tyrant that stays in one spot when you're in like something like Onslaught, or you can just throw into a wave. The nice thing is because Wave of Light does so little damage compared to everything else, generally enemies won't die right away from it, so you can just get your MP back up full. This is why Wave of Light's so good, is because of this passive, allowing us to just leave this on the ground, and we just get our MP back from that passive. And allows us to kind of just mitigate Serena's MP cost issues, since she does have pretty high MP cost issues, to her weapon. And that's all I really wanted to show you guys for tips and tricks section. Serena's a really cool character, with a lot of kind of unique things about her. But hopefully this will help you guys along while you're playing her. And that's going to go and wrap up for this Serena build guide, which has been a lot of fun to have another way to play Serena, since before we could only just play gun Serena, but now we actually have more of an ability / skill Serena, which I think they really nailed. But let me know what you guys think about the build down in the comments down below, or if you have any questions, also go ahead and hit me up down below as well. And if you guys did enjoy the video or plan to use a build, I appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps out the video a lot. And if you want to know when new videos are coming out, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. I'm planning to do a lot of Blair builds as well, since he also got updated this patch. Also, I do stream most days on Twitch. I'll go ahead and throw up the information on the screen there. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, I really would appreciate it. It helps the video get out to a lot more people. But that's going to go and wrap up for this video. Appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch y'all again next time.